Perfect.
Hey guys, hope you're all doing well. Today I just want to talk about poking in Tekken. Basically, a guide for intermediates on how to poke. I think it's something that confuses a lot of people, and a lot of people start poking like really late in their Tekken career, or whatever you want to call it. They go a long time without understanding this very like core fundamental thing. So I would just like to explain to you guys, what poking is, how we should be doing it, like what's even the point of doing it, stuff like that. So to start, we'll just define like what is a poke. So people maybe have a different definition than you talk to one guy, he says one thing, right? But the simple explanation of a poke, in my opinion, is generally a relatively fast and low committal move, often but not always like -3 or less on block, or if we're talking about like lows, like -13 or less on block. So these moves are used way more often than like the slower, higher committal, and more rewarding buttons. We're often going to be using them to keep our opponents in check or set up advantageous situations for ourselves. So we think of moves like just simple jabs, jab strings, things like that. DF1s, moves that really just are really fast, give us a good situation on block. We can do them very often. Things like that. So even if we're talking about low pokes, like Dragunov down 2, Dragunov DF1, Dragunov 1-3, 2-1, all this stuff, right? We even have pokes that maybe end our turn, right? Like drag DF4, serves a different purpose but is still a poke. So we'll talk now a little bit about the benefits of poking and why these moves are really, really good. So I talked a little bit before, about the strengths. Low committal buttons, very fast. But we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that now. So pokes often are going to be much faster than your slower and more rewarding buttons. So drag DF1 compared to like running 2, or jabs compared to like QCF4, right? The speed of these moves is really important, and the slower moves are slower for a reason, right? They're more rewarding, or they set up more one-sided interactions and situations, but that also makes them a little less spammable, I guess, for lack of a better word, right? We can't just throw these moves out super often, like willy-nilly, without thinking, right? So the speed of pokes makes it really easy to fight back up close, against an opponent that's playing, range 0 with you and kind of, contesting you, right? We need to be able to contest back. So pokes, really fast moves like this are, going to be one of the best ways that we can do that. So the speed of pokes also makes them a really fast way to set up potential situations for yourself to get big reward afterwards, which we're going to touch on more later because that's kind of the most important part of the video. But pokes are also low committal, like I said earlier, and if you weren't exactly sure what I meant by that, basically I'm using it to refer to the risk of tossing out a button, right? So moves like drag, running 2, these would be pretty high committal moves. Same with like QCF4, like backroll plus 2, right? So these moves are high committal in the sense that we kind of have to commit to throwing them out, right? We can lose a lot for you doing these moves at the wrong time. So these moves can be easily read and stepped, or interrupted or something like that. And if you whiff this move, you're likely like super dead, right? So like, for example, this is just a super simple thing, but drag QCF4, right? And then let's compare that to like drag DF1, right? So whiffing drag DF1, not that big of a deal, right? Even if we whiff like just like a 1 jab here, we're losing pretty much nothing. Now like 2-1 might, 2-1 just tracks him. Okay, well, I wanted to show you guys the recovery of jab strings, but drag is broken and this jab strings track too well. So regardless, way better whiff recovery than a lot of these bigger moves. So even if you do whiff one of these pokes, it's normally not the end of the world. You'll often eat a small punish, right? So pokes are just harder to read. They're much faster, they're difficult to interrupt and contest. So these two factors combined lead us to our third point and benefit of poking, which is the most important thing, and the thing that we need to understand the most about poking. Now the biggest thing to understand about pokes is that they kind of give us the potential to make plays, right? Which is something that I touched on earlier. And so when we're talking about the strength of pokes, understanding the previous 2 strengths, right, is really important to understanding this third one, because like I said, these moves are very fast and they're very low committal, meaning that we can do these moves a lot, and this combined with, being able to use these moves to outplay an opponent and set up a situation for ourselves, right, to get damage, get big reward, is really, really important, right? So considering the fact that, pokes are often like very good on block or, on hit, and they, just leave you at like a slight disadvantage, it makes it very easy for you to make a quick decision after your poke is blocked, right? So whether that be you want to move around after your poke is blocked, right? You want to, use another move, you want to just block, right? Like whatever it may be, right? It makes it very easy to make decisions after this poke. And again, we're not risking much tossing out this poke, right? And we are basically able to, like rinse interactions and rinse situations on an opponent, right? So, of course, like it's possible for us to make these plays in neutral too without using a move first. Of course, we can always just interrupt something in neutral. We can always just step something in neutral. But whenever you throw a poke, basically what's kind of happening is that you're forcing an interaction onto your opponent, right? In this case, like an interaction just means kind of, okay, a move has been thrown and both players have to make a decision afterwards, right? When I throw drag DF1, my opponent has to make a decision afterwards. And I know that, right? They have to do something. They have to make a decision. Maybe their decision is just to block, right? But that's still doing something. That's still a decision. So often, this interaction is both players kind of trying to read what the other player is going to do and outplay them by calling them out for their decision. So, maybe you think that your opponent is going to like retaliate, right? Like after your mid poke, then like we have a lot of options to beat that. I mean, like one thing, we can just do is like move around, potential retaliation. We have to go left here. Okay. All right, we can move around potential retaliation and launch someone, things like that, depending on what their retaliation is. Like, for example, we could step this 1-1-2 here, or, we could like just down 2 here and beat the high, right? So, we have a lot of decisions we can make here, and even if we have the frames to interrupt a response, we could try to do that as well, right? With a, like a jab string of our own or something of that nature, right? I mean, we have, I think this one is is Kazuya DF2, right? So he's trying to outplay me, trying to step, right? Maybe a previous interaction, I stepped his 1-1-2 like I did in that last example, right? So he's trying to call me out with, a DF2 mid homing move, right? So, okay, well, this DF1, 1-2-1, right? For example. So, maybe you've thrown like a bunch of low pokes after your DF1, now you think your opponent's gonna hop kick, block and punish, right? So we have a lot of decisions we can make here. These interactions aren't always super rewarding. You can't always win them all as well, right? Which is the important thing. Like we can't always guess right on what our opponent's gonna do. We can't always win these interactions, right? It's normal. Sometimes you just get outplayed and that's fine, right? You think Kazuya is gonna do, like a 1-1 or something after your DF1, right? You try to like down 2, you get DF2, whatever, okay? We can take something away from the interaction, we learn something, right? We can afford to lose that exchange. So remember the previous benefits here, right? Which is that, again, yeah, we can lose these interactions. It's, normal, right? It's happened sometimes, but we can run these interactions like a lot, like over and over again, if you want to, all the time. So, that's kind of what separates a lot of these from, like I said, like the slower, lower committal buttons that, yes, can potentially be more rewarding and can potentially set up like better offensive situations, but they're not as rinsable, right? They're not as easy to just do. I mean, I think obviously we all know that, the situation after like, you block a drag QCF4, that's a scarier situation and a better offensive situation for drag than when he just DF1s you. But drag is not able to QCF4 you nearly as much as he's able to just DF1 you, right? And also the QCF4 situation is a little bit more one-dimensional than the DF1 situation, right? Like what's he gonna do here? Full crouch low, right? Like maybe walking 3, maybe he just like waits and tries to whiff punish you, right? Whatever, but like there's not a lot of layers there. Whereas with DF1, there can be an unlimited amount of layers and an unlimited amount of decisions that can be made. So it just makes it, a little more difficult to sometimes outplay people in those situations. So again, we can run these interactions all the time. all the time you're doing these moves, you're making small decisions, trying to catch an opponent if you think you can read their behavior. And if you guess wrong on what they'll do, you're not often losing a bunch of life, or maybe even, you're not even losing your turn, right? It's not the end of the world, right? So that's really like one of the biggest main benefits of poke. So now, of course, the question that a lot of people are going to have is like, what decision do I make after a poke? So I gave you guys like a couple examples of decisions that commonly be made, and you can make with a lot of different characters. Just slightly change what move you're doing, but the important thing here is to not overthink decision making, right? I can't tell you what you should do after your DF1 because I have no idea what's going on in your match. So the number one thing that we want here is to just make fast decisions. So when we throw a DF1 or we throw a low poke, we need to know exactly what we want to do after, right? We cannot hesitate. So if we do a DF1, we need to instantly do something afterwards, right? That doesn't mean we want to immediately press a button all the time. Doesn't mean we want to, go crazy, right? It just means when we do a DF1, we should know what we want to do afterwards. And sometimes what we want to do afterwards is just like do nothing, right? But we need to know that. We cannot hesitate. We cannot be confused about what we should do, right? Because that's how we die. So we need to be ready to make decisions instantaneously. Don't confuse that with just constant aggression and like always pressing on immediate timing, right? Basically just means we need to be able to make decisions on the fly as soon as a move is thrown, because that's also one of the number one ways that we're going to beat our opponent's poking, which I'll probably make a video about next. But again, instant decision making, no hesitation, number one thing. Even if our decision is to just block and chill, or our decision is to play safely and sidestep block or something, right? Like we're still making a decision. So the most important thing here is to make our decision making instantly and keep our decisions varied, right? We don't want to be repeatedly making the same decision or play over and over again. I mean, if it's working against someone and they're just dying to the same thing over and over again, that's fine. You can do that. You don't have to feel bad about it. A win's a win, right? You don't always have to try to play super high level. But we definitely want to make sure that like if things are not working, then we are not trying to like brute force the same interaction and decision over and over again, right? So varied decision making is very, very key here, right? We want to be showing a lot of options, right? DF1 sidestep block, DF1 1-2-1, DF1 just block and punish, right? DF1 like all kinds of stuff that we're gonna do. So keep it varied. Again, like many things in Tekken, there's not an exact science to decision making here, and I can't exactly tell you what you should do, of course, but like what you're going to choose to do is going to depend on your character, your opponent's character, and what's been going on in the match, like i.e. what's been working for you and what hasn't been working, or patterns and tendencies you've noticed from your opponent, things like that. So often pokes are also really good to gather information about an opponent, right? So once again, these are very fast, low committal buttons, and you can tell a lot about how someone plays depending on how they respond to your poking, which this is a big thing that can help you in your decision making regarding poking. So you're not risking a lot or giving out a lot of information about yourself, but you can potentially see habits in return, right? So for example, jab retaliation, which we can step or we can high crush it, movement after things often, which we can call out with tracking moves, etc., etc. Often like we see decisions or patterns and we kind of wait for a moment to cash out and call that out, right? So even with like information about timing, right? Do they respond instantly? Do they respond on a delay? You get the idea, right? And when it comes to gathering information, a lot of times I find this to be a topic that's very confusing for newbies, and I think I'll make a video about this as well. But again, don't overcomplicate the process. You don't necessarily need to look for hyper-specific things. Sometimes you can, but you often don't need to, right? So like when we're talking about looking for information, we're not necessarily talking about what exactly is the opponent going to do here, what exact move are they going to throw. We're looking often for like simple things that we can kind of catch all, right? We can catch multiple things, because it's very hard to read someone's exact decision making, unless they're like a turbo noob. But often it's very hard to make really, really educated decisions like that, and often people aren't going to make like the same exact decision twice in a row. Sometimes they will, especially at a lower level, but we're looking for things like movement tendencies, right? Do they like to move after things? We call that out with homing. We call that out with realignment, with tracking moves. Do they like to, do they often retaliate with jabs after things, right? We can call that out numerous ways. Do they see a move is thrown and then wait a second and then take their turn, right? Are they on like delay timing habit, right? We can call that out. You guys get the idea. I don't need to go super hard here, but don't overcomplicate the adaptation process. Oftentimes you're just looking for simple, easily understandable things that we can call out, right, without having to know exactly what they're going to do, because we can use multiple options that are going to catch different things here. That's very important, right? We don't know what exact move they're going to do, but we know an option that we have that's going to catch a lot of potential responses from them. So good decisions to make. So hopefully now you understand the concept a bit more and feel more comfortable with the concept of poking, right? So, a simple way that I like to think about it is that pokes are the fastest and safest way that you can just set up opportunities for yourself, which is the main benefit. So, again, they're very, very abusable moves, and we can just constantly rinse these interactions. And, we're not risking much going for this. And when we combine it, with safe movement techniques, dash blocking, sidestep guard, etc., as well as just having good timing, right? We're not always doing this. We're doing this. Okay, we're trying to be Ulsan here. We're super good. We get it, right? But good timing and really safe movement and low committal buttons like pokes, you can totally just dominate someone with moves that don't exactly seem super noteworthy or hugely rewarding, right? So that's the main benefit of pokes. So I hope this video helped you guys out. If it did, like, comment, subscribe. I got more videos coming. Sorry for the kind of delay in videos, but I had to go to Evo, and I've been busy with finals and all that stuff. So I still enjoy making the videos, and I do want to keep them coming. Maybe next video will be about how to deal with poking from the opponent as the defender. But honestly, I feel like understanding this video, if you guys understand what pokes are good for, maybe that will make it easier for you as well to understand how to deal with pokes, because a lot of the principles and things that we're discussing are kind of applicable to both sides, as the poker and as the person that's getting poked. The pokey, I don't know, sounds like a weird inappropriate thing, but regardless, thank you guys for watching. Again, I hope it helped you out. Please, if it did, comment, subscribe, like I said, all that stuff. Feel free to hit me up for coaching on Discord if you guys are interested in, just having another set of eyes on your gameplay. If you've been struggling, whatever, if you want questions answered, feel free to hit me up on Discord. But other than that, yeah, thanks for watching again, guys. Hopefully it helped you, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.